I'll start this off with a bit of an admission, and that is that I am no good at pitching Peakon. So if you'd like to see the full range of features that we have in our engagement platform, please come and stop by our booth and we will be happy to take you through. And someone much more experienced than me can take you through it all. But what I really care about is the statistics behind what we do. So I have a background as a data scientist, and my goal is to take advantage of the data set that Peakon holds and figure out which insights we can deliver that are generalizable and can actually be used by people like you every day to actually make things better for employees. So I'm going to start off with a fairly bold claim, and that is that the traditional engagement survey is not fair. Louder, okay? So when I go out and speak to our customers, this is one of the most common problems that we find. Sometimes we hear things from our customers like our managers aren't taking action, they're not owning the results of the engagement survey, they're afraid, or they sometimes find excuses to explain away their scores. And this is actually how they phrase it. They say the engagement survey is not fair. And this is a huge problem, because if managers don't accept that the engagement survey is fair, nothing is ever going to change. Those people are in the best place to actually make a difference, and they need to understand that they are being treated fairly. So this is really concerning for me, and I set my team a challenge to go away and find out if this is true or not. I started reflecting on some of my own experiences and trying to figure out if I thought the engagement survey was fair or not. So I thought about my team in a previous role. So these are fake names and fake pictures, but the point still stands. I have 3 employees on my team, and if I tell you a little bit more about them, like how long they've worked at the company, I think that gives you an idea of how they're going to respond to the survey. Everyone has a mental image of engagement and how it varies over time, and whether we like it or not, I think we somehow know that this is how it goes. That when an employee first starts at the organization, they give very high scores. And this is completely normal, and it's for good reasons, like everything is new and shiny and exciting. You can't really be unhappy about things like salary from day one because you've just accepted the role. You get a lot of attention from your manager, so everyone's very happy about management support and things like that. And things like growth just haven't become a problem because you haven't had a chance to see that growth is a problem or not. But is this really fair? If I've worked at a company for 25 years and I'm giving lower scores, not because I'm less engaged, but just because I'm a little bit jaded about it or I've seen it all before, does that make me less engaged? I don't think so. When I first started at Peakon, I was giving 10 out of 10 to everything because I was really excited to be in a new role. As time has gone on, my scores have dropped. Today, I probably give 8 out of 10 for most things. I'm still incredibly happy in my job, and all of the outcomes that we really care about when we talk about engagement, things like absenteeism or productivity or probability that I'm going to leave the organization, all of that has got way more positive over time. And I think my value to the organization has increased massively as I've got more experienced. But my engagement score has, as a raw score, has probably dropped. And this is a real problem when you come to analyze the results of surveys. So going back to this example, I think this is my mental image for what these 3 people would give. Someone who's been there for 8 years would be giving a considerably lower score than the people who've just started. But that doesn't mean that they are really less engaged, or not necessarily anyway. So we went away and we actually did the research. We looked at all of the questions we've ever asked, looked at all of the answers we've received, over 30 million answers from millions of employees. And we actually built a statistical model to understand the connection between tenure and engagement scores, or actually scores in general across the survey. And this is the result that we found. This explains exactly how scores drop over time. And this takes into account things like age, department, gender, anything you think that might interact has been taken account of in this modeling. So we haven't invented this idea. You see this all over the engagement science literature. Everyone knows that there is we call it a honeymoon period that employees go through. But we can actually quantify how big that honeymoon period is, what the drop looks like, and when exactly it kicks in. And you can see how it eventually plateaus. So I think you have to take this into account when you're understanding the results of an engagement survey. If you don't take this into account, I think it really isn't fair, and managers will be upset in the comparison. If I'm a manager and my team has been there for 10 years, every single person is super experienced, and they're being very productive, but they're giving lower scores, I'm going to look like I'm a bad manager because my team is all giving lower scores. But it doesn't mean that I necessarily am. I'm just not being compared fairly to everyone else. So I think this was a really big finding for us, and we decided we had to do something about it. We actually built an entire feature around this. We call it True Benchmark. And it means that every single part of the organization has a customized benchmark that takes into account the demographics. So things like tenure, or age, or gender, or location in the world, or any of these things that we think can have an impact. So if you have a manager of a small team with very high tenure staff, they will get a lower benchmark to take into account that we know that their employees will score lower, and it doesn't actually mean there's a problem. Equally, if you're a manager of a brand new team, you will get a higher benchmark than other people. And that is because you should be setting your sights higher, because we know they're going to score higher straight away. And then over time, the benchmark will naturally change, and eventually it will plateau. And I love this work, because this is exactly the kind of work that I want to do. It's combining our big data set with completely standardized questions and drivers, and figuring out real problems that people analytics professionals are having. And I think it's something that worked really well, and it's one of the things that we've built that I'm most proud of, because it genuinely is something I think makes the analysis fairer. And this is one of the themes that we've been finding time and time again. Actually, employees change faster than the company does. So the size of that drop from day one to, let's say, a year in is 0.7 on a 10-point scale. That is much bigger than most changes at the company level. Companies take years to change engagement that big. It's just very hard to have some kind of intervention with that big an impact. The only way you normally see scores change that much is if you change the question. So yearly surveying really doesn't work, and I think that's something that everyone in this conference probably agrees on, because employees are changing much faster than that. After the first 3 months of someone's career in a new role is really, really important. The next 9 months is really important as well. I think you do need to be monitoring, at least quarterly, if not monthly, to really see these changes. So we decided to split a lot of our analysis into 3 categories. You have the onboarding, the initial development, and then the ongoing development. We think you should look at all of the scores through these 3 lenses. We don't think you should do separate surveys for these categories. Separate surveys to me just don't make sense. Engagement is the same thing at all times. It varies, but the things that drive engagement are constant. Things like recognition always have an impact. Things like accomplishment always have an impact. And that isn't different for onboarders or for people who've been there for 10 years. That's always true. And this is actually some interesting work that has not appeared anywhere else yet. So this is a bit of a sneak preview of something that we'll publish later in the year. But by looking at all of our company data through those 3 categories, we actually were able to look at the differences between some of our drivers of engagement. So these 4 are the drivers that we think change the least. So it kind of doesn't matter whether someone has been in the organization only a few months or 10 years. These things always matter, and they don't change so much. So it's always possible to have problems in particular areas or particular employees. But if someone's happy with meaningful work, they're probably happy with meaningful work in 1 year as well, or in 2 years. And there's a much slower change. So you have to get these right early on, and then you can just make sure they're still going okay, but you don't have to put a huge amount of work into them constantly. Equally, peer relationships. If people like working with their colleagues, well, that doesn't suddenly change the day they become a longer tenured employee. That will always be the case. So these are absolutely critical. But then you have a different category, and these are the ones that require ongoing maintenance. These things vary a lot. So growth is probably the best example of this, and I imagine that everyone probably agrees that growth for new employees looks very different to growth for high tenure employees. They have different needs, they place different emphasis on this driver, and you need to create some kind of customized approach to growth. So I would recommend separate schemes for growth in high tenure employees because they are a very different set of people. There's some interesting ones as well, like strategy. Strategy is something that I would think would be the same for everyone, but actually the research shows that it does change a lot with tenure. So I would like to look into this a lot more and try and figure out what's exactly going on there. If anyone's interested in this kind of work, please come and speak to me because I am more than happy to explain it in more detail. And potentially, I would love to hear your ideas and ways in which we could go about looking at this. And I have one final insight, which is that you might be surprised by the results of the survey.
He looks more confused than
This actually came up for mild surprise on Google, so I trust Google. Right. Every provider in the employee engagement space is using scores, or survey scores, to figure out where the problems and where the strengths of various companies are. I feel like this has come a long way over the last 3 years, and we've got more and more advanced, and we're doing collectively a pretty good job of pointing out where the problems are. But that's because the scores make it very, very obvious. There is a lot of content in the survey that doesn't appear through the scores. It appears through the text. And I believe that the next 10 years of employee engagement are going to be about extracting more and more insight from the text. The scores tell you where the problems are. The text tells you how to solve it. And I think my team is really, really excited about all of the things we can do around NLP, around better summarization of the content of the text that we hold, around new ways of modeling it completely, about ways of handling things across many languages. So Peakon supports, I think, 40 languages at the moment, and that is a real challenge, I promise you, to try and make a connection across 40 languages to understand when people are speaking about the same thing is extremely difficult. So we do text in quite an interesting way. We started looking at the comments that we hold. It's worth saying that 1 in 4 questions that are answered on the Peakon platform come with text attached to them. So it isn't a rare thing, it's a huge amount of data. We have millions and millions of comments across every single driver, whether it's growth, meaningful work, peer relationships. Apologies. And when we started looking at the comments, we expected to see something like this. So this is a very generic text comment that mentions things like feedback and performance reviews. And the traditional thing we would do is tag this up, say, okay, this comment is speaking about feedback and performance reviews, and we would attach them to the appropriate driver, and we would summarize how many times these things have been mentioned across the company. I mean, that's great, and it does kind of work, but no one really speaks like this. No one speaks in generic terms like feedback or performance reviews. I mean, they do get mentioned, but not like this. People are much more speaking like this. They talk about individual people that only really make sense if you know where in the organization they are, or they use terms that only really mean something inside your organization. They refer to specific values, places, people, things. And it's much more important to pull out these kind of topics. If everyone in my company is mentioning the same person and saying they're fantastic, they drive all of the great work that I do, I would much rather know that my people are speaking about that than that if they're speaking about manager or office space or something very generic. So we want to build an algorithm that pulls things like this out, and this is the real interesting content that we pull. We have an algorithm that can do that. It's completely automatic. It's completely reactive to the words used. It doesn't require any kind of whitelisting or reactive tagging of comments. It just all happens automatically. And we found that 50% of the topics discussed by employees use language that you wouldn't have expected to see, or you would have had to work incredibly hard ahead of the survey to actually write down a list of words that you expected to see. And it just doesn't happen. We have clients who have seen the names of specific products that they've produced, or specific people, or specific things that they never expected to see. And those are the ones that make their eyes light up, and it really drives action on their side. So I'm much more interested in finding those weird, those strange, those hard to find topics than I am another topic of meeting rooms or lunch or manager or something like that. So I think you do need an adaptable, a reactive, and a specialized algorithm that can handle this. We're doing a lot of work around text analysis. So the topic summarization is something that we spent some of the first years of Peakon putting together, and it is in a very good state now. But now we're looking forward and doing things like actually prioritizing the individual comments that employees leave so that we can highlight the most actionable ones or the most important ones to read first. We're also doing some great stuff around sensitive comments, so immediate alerting of particularly sensitive terms that might be mentioned in comments. If you work in the financial services industry, you need to know if someone says the word whistleblowing, or if someone in another organization threatens direct harm against themselves or someone else. It's not enough to review that a week after the survey closes. You need to know now. And so we immediately alert anytime we see that. And I think we're still only scratching the surface. We haven't figured out the best way to do NLP, and I'd love to work on this with some of you. If anyone has any ideas around this as well, please come and talk to me, because this is the kind of work that gets me excited, and this is the kind of work that Peakon really wants to be doing.